jeopardize our military readiness. It will eviscerate job-creating investments in education and energy and medical research.
That this work, along with hundreds of thousands of jobs, are currently in jeopardy because of politics in Washington.
Federal prosecutors will have to close cases and let criminals go. Air traffic controllers and airport security will see cutbacks, which means more delays at airports across the country. Thousands of teachers and educators will be laid off.
All told, the sequester could cost tens of thousands of jobs right here in Virginia.
It will add hundreds of thousands of Americans to the unemployment rolls. This is not an abstraction. People will lose their jobs.
And the impact of this policy won't be felt overnight, but it will be real.
And now we know that after the dire warnings of massive layoffs, the real cost, according to the government's own accountability office, 1 federal job.
This is not an abstraction. People will lose their jobs.
That may have been the voice of the people who make big government's bills, but now you're going to hear from the voice of the people who pay big government's bills. Yes, you are listening to Speaking of Taxpayers, sponsored by the 362,000-member National Taxpayers Union. I'm your co-host, Pete Sepp.
And I'm your co-host, Doug Kellogg.
Welcome to this week's broadcast.
Yep, that's right, Pete. As you explained, those are the people who are making big government's bills. They're making the bills larger, and as podcast listeners know, we were very interested in keeping the sequester. Part of what undermined it was the ridiculous fear-mongering we saw before it went into effect, based on no facts whatsoever, because now that we know the facts we talked about a couple weeks ago, only 1 federal worker was laid off due to sequester. So definitely check out that video on YouTube and spread it to your friends. A great example, a great way to show just how ridiculous those predictions were, and have a little fun with it. But we have to laugh so that we don't cry about these things. So that's at YouTube. Just search National Taxpayers Union, or you can find it on the website, ntu.org.
Very worthwhile.
So some bad news, although it's definitely a fun video, to good news. Balanced budget amendment taking another step forward through the Article 5 process.
Yes, as you know, folks, we have been following and actively participating in the drive to obtain 34 state resolutions on behalf of a drafting convention for a balanced federal budget amendment to the U.S. Constitution. This is what Article 5 of the Constitution provides. You get 34 states calling for this assembly to draft the amendment. The assembly takes place. It's sent out for ratification just as if the amendment originated in Congress. We now have 24 of the 34 required thanks to the unanimous passage through both chambers of the Louisiana legislature last week. What great news. That means more momentum behind this amendment.
Absolutely. And, fitting to lead off with that item after talking about the sequester video briefly and letting people hear the audio, because these issues are interconnected. When Congress refuses to implement even the most moderate, spending cuts, which completely, remember, the sequester completely avoided entitlements. So these were really, should have been a politically convenient thing. So if you don't take those small steps, you don't be surprised when the states and the people say enough is enough and stop spending on their own.
Absolutely. This is a drive of vital importance to the future of our country.
So keep up to date with that at ntu.org as well. And want to just give a quick shout out before we get to our guest. Investors Business Daily just published an op-ed by our own Brandon Arnold on the need for corporate tax reform. Brandon highlights how you may have seen in the news a number of stories of companies moving their headquarters overseas, and he talks about how reforming the tax code is the only way to stop this, other than really onerous big government type of quote-unquote solutions, which won't really solve anything.
Yeah, exactly. There are already responses in Congress. I saw one from Senator Levin that basically raises the bar of what a foreign-owned versus a domestically owned company is, and that's all aimed at stopping what are called inversions. In other words, U.S. firms taking headquarters overseas so they can presumably pay a lower tax rate than what we have in the United States, and that tax rate here actually is about 40% when you factor in the state and local corporate tax. That is the worst in the industrialized world. Even after deductions and credits, the effective tax rate is among the worst, as Brandon points out in his article.
And Pete himself wrote an interesting piece that's in Roll Call this week as well. So check that out. You might have to search that at rollcall.com, search for Pete Sepp, and check out Pete's piece, taking a bit of a different angle, but same issue on how we need tax reform to solve these types of issues. So really good work from Pete and Brandon, and we encourage you to check it out. And you can always go to ntu.org and check out our multimedia section as well to catch up on these types of pieces.
And in this segment of Speaking of Taxpayers, leading taxpayers to waste, you can't see it in writing, folks, so you don't know it's a pun, but it is. We're talking about leadership in environmental and energy design, or LEED, L-E-E-D, a building standard certification set of criteria that has recently come under some very serious scrutiny by taxpayer organizations, yours truly's included. But actually, I owe a lot of this to my good colleague David Williams, who's president of Taxpayers Protection Alliance, for cluing us into this issue in the first place and being so persistent in pursuing the LEED issue long before we sunk our teeth into it. That's why he's here today, because we wanted the expert on to talk about all the aspects of LEED. Thanks for joining us, David.
Thanks a lot, Pete. And when we talk about LEED and these green building standards, there's a lot of different layers to this. The first layer really is to build these buildings with energy efficiency. I mean, that's a noble goal, and everyone wants to have more energy efficiency, but whether or not LEED is doing it, that is the big question that we face, but also the cost to taxpayers. Because we hear about the LEED building standards and we hear about some of the shenanigans that go on with it, but there is an actual direct cost to taxpayers to this. And let me talk a little bit about that.
Yes.
For just a little bit of background, the LEED standards were created by the U.S. Green Building Council. This is a private nonprofit organization, 501c3 organization, and it's built, their members consist of a lot of the green industry. So a lot of the members are selling products to the green industry. So
right there you have some questions of perhaps conflict of interest.
That's the first red flag. So we looked at the Green Building Council and the history of LEED, and we saw this sort of this creep into the federal government, where they've convinced the federal government to use these green building standards to build new buildings, to refurbish old ones. And here's the kicker. Each building, just to have it LEED certified, costs taxpayers $150,000, up to $150,000, just to get LEED certified. Now, that doesn't include the increased cost of construction.
Yikes.
So if you have to use expensive products because of the LEED standards, you're going to increase construction costs by upwards of what the New York Times said, upwards of 20%. So taxpayers are paying 20% more for construction of buildings because of these standards.
My goodness. And of course, there are those who would say, well, maybe the upfront 20% premium we're paying here is worth it over the long term because of the potential energy savings, assuming the savings were there. And that, of course, leads us to a whole new set of questions.
Boy, it really does, Pete, because what we've seen is that a lot of these buildings were just recently constructed. So probably about 5 years ago, we didn't have the information. We didn't have the energy information to see if LEED was actually working or not working. But I've noticed in the past year and a half or so, we've seen more information come out about the energy usage. We've seen this in New York and in Washington, D.C. There's one common thing here, is that LEED buildings are not energy efficient. And in some cases, they're using more energy, which you would hope that at least be a draw, a push, that they would use the same amount of energy as non-LEED, but they're actually using more energy. And if you look deeper into these certifications and these points that you can get to be LEED certified, you start to understand why they're not more energy efficient. Bike racks.
Well, okay, that doesn't seem to save electricity in a given building offhand. I know that I suppose it could be reasoned in a stretch that if some of the employees don't drive to work, they might be imposing a smaller carbon footprint, but that has nothing to do with the building itself.
Well, and empty bike racks. I mean, you can have bike racks, and if no one uses their bikes, well, how does that help energy
Yeah,
efficiency?
and
Because
you-
you're not taking people off the road.
Yeah, and you still get credit for it, though, if nobody uses them, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a casino in Las Vegas that was LEED certified. And when you think of buildings that probably aren't moving towards green energy, are casinos. They're
Yes.
smoky, they're loud, they're everything that's probably, against environmental. But it was the Palazzo Casino and Hotel. This is how they achieved LEED status. Is the bike racks, that was one of them. And they have these smart cards to tell the hotel staff when you needed new towels.
Oh, well,
And little
all right.
and little door hangers. And you had little door hangers you could put on the back of your door saying that you wanted fresh towels. This is what they thought was energy efficiency and fake grass. Because there's a water problem in Vegas and Nevada. So they
see.
had fake grass, which I don't know, if you're an environmental group, wouldn't you want the real stuff?
As a carbon sink.
As a carbon sink. So here you have some really just bizarre things happening. And a casino. Pete, a casino should not really be trying to achieve green status because it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Wow. And that problem really gets to the root of why there are many taxpayer groups involved here. If this were just some standard where private establishments like casinos wanted a seal of approval slapped on their building and it cost a bundle and it wasn't really saving energy, well, I guess that's up to the shareholders to decide that this is a smart strategy for the PR value or a dumb one for the bottom line. But again, we as taxpayers can't make that decision. We can't tell the IRS, well, we're going to send you less money this year because we think the LEED standard is inefficient and it's not worth the markup on all the federal buildings. We're being forced into this situation.
And this is about tax breaks, too, because
Yes.
this casino received huge tax breaks because they were LEED certified. So this isn't just a private entity saying, we're going to be LEED certified, we're going to do these things, these silly things, and have the appearance of being an environmental. They're getting tax breaks, and those are the incentives that the government uses to have these individual buildings do this. And there's so much about the U.S. Green Building Council. Right now, they have a fund balance of about $50 million, which is a really good fund
Substantial.
balance for a 501c3. And this is really an industry nonprofit. Now, one of the LEED checkoffs is that you have to have someone who's LEED certified to approve the drawings and all the architecture.
Sure.
Well, guess what? There's a course that the U.S. Green Building Council puts you through.
Oh, I see.
And that course costs about $2,000. So once you complete that $2,000 course, you can be a, quote, LEED certified person to check off the boxes on the LEED program.
That's almost really a closed-end business model, you know? You get the certification by having a certification expert certify you, who in turn has been certified by the certifier.
This sounds like who's on first.
Yes.
But
Wow.
but that's exactly the scam that's going on here. And what we want is we want more competition in this. Because ironically, and maybe not ironically, but more energy efficient buildings will be great for taxpayers.
Sure.
I mean, these
Absolutely.
buildings use a lot of energy. And in the past, we've talked about energy savings with energy performance saving contracts, different ways to do this. So yes, great. If we are going to promulgate a set of standards, they should work.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, they shouldn't cost a taxpayer anything. Standards should not cost a taxpayer one dime. They should be saving taxpayer money. And it's not. And that's the fundamental problem.
Yeah. There are just techniques that are being ignored here. Things like life cycle cost analysis. That's sort of an engineering realm, but it's simply adding up the costs and benefits of a given technology over a given term of time and trying to figure out, well, is this a good thing in the long or intermediate run? And if it is, we should be doing it. If it isn't, we shouldn't. Those are evaluations that I think we can now conduct with a reasonable level of confidence. As you said, there might not have been the data on LEED in its early stages to determine this, but now we have access.
Well, this is about transparency. This is about information. And the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, we sent out Freedom of Information Act requests back in January of 2013, and we have gotten a massive runaround from the General Services Administration, because what we're trying to do is we are trying to find the connection between the General Services Administration, the entity, the agency that is promulgating LEED, between them and the U.S. Green Building Council. We asked for emails mentioning the U.S. Green Building Council to the GSA to see what kind of traffic was going on before 2010, because 2010 was the year when these standards were set by the GSA. So we went back to the year 2001 up to 2010 to see the email traffic, to see who was talking to whom about these standards, so we could start to connect the dots. And a lot of other organizations have done this sort of work on FOIAs with other agencies and have uncovered some amazing things.
Yes.
And it's getting to a point where we're probably going to have to hire an attorney to really push them, because they were refusing to give us the answer. And this is, Washington, D.C., some things are just too funny to believe. We get an email, and it says, well, to print up all these 70,000 plus emails, we're going to have to print them out. And so I replied, I go, well, take them electronically. Well, we don't do that. We'd have to print them out for you. But I'm asking you about your green building standards. and the option is to print out all these emails.
We're going to kill a few trees to meet your request. Oh, goodness.
Maybe at that point, GSA will be LEED non-compliant if they have to print out all those emails.
And they'll have to levy a penalty on themselves. Oh, I don't know if I want to go there. That is incredible. And of course, I have to stand corrected. We don't really have access to the information. The information may exist. We just can't get all of it. We've seen some of it trickle through. I came across this when writing an article for U.S. News and World Report about it, a study of Navy facilities that found that I believe it was 11 facilities, and 4 of them came out very poorly. They were LEED certified, and yet they were no more efficient than non-certified
And
ones.
the pro-LEED folks use that as an outlier.
I see.
They said, well, they didn't do it correctly, so it really doesn't. This doesn't count. This study doesn't count. But we look at a city like New York City, Washington, D.C., more and more information is coming out. That study on the Navy facility, that was not an outlier.
Right.
I mean, that was a warning.
Yeah.
That was a warning sign. And Pete, I got to tell you, and I've told this to people a million times, is that government has the information. They just choose not to share it. Their job, they spend billions of dollars a year collecting information and putting it somewhere. It's somewhere buried in these agencies. It's just they don't want to give it to you.
Yeah.
They refuse to, and they say, well, we don't have it. I don't believe that for a second, because they collect so much information.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, too, there are all kinds of embarrassing revelations, not just in the information, but probably in the connections between government officials and potentially the U.S. Green Building Council. Who knows? Maybe not. But
Well, Pete, remember the Department of Defense, the Boeing tanker lease deal?
oh, yes.
A person went to jail. Darlene Druyan, I think that's how you pronounce her last name.
I think so, yeah.
She went to jail because she went from the Pentagon to work for Boeing, and there was collusion there to award them the tanker, the refueler.
Yes.
I got to tell you, there's something in the back of my head telling me that the same thing has happened at GSA, is that someone may have gone from the U.S. Green Building Council, worked for GSA. I don't have that proof yet, but I really think there's going to be a connection somewhere there, because this is what happens in the government, is they change places so often, and we see it at the Pentagon, as I mentioned, but other areas, transportation. So my gut is telling me that in these emails somewhere, if we ever get them, that we're going to see that connection.
Wow. Well, we'll certainly be waiting to see what comes of that request. Who knows? I've not actually looked into that part of the equation, and it's unfortunate that it's so hard to get answers to questions like these. I mean, it is our government. It shouldn't be a matter where you request information and roadblocks are put up, such as we have to destroy an entire printer just to fulfill your request.
And what happens here is you have, each administration has their pet projects, their pet policies.
Yes.
And for the Obama administration, it's environmental. They talk about climate change, and they talk about the global warming. So I think that when they pursue an agenda like this, they have blinders on.
Yes.
They have one thing in focus, and that is to be as green as possible. They don't look at the cost of taxpayers. They don't look at the cost of businesses. They just pursue their agenda no matter the cost. And like I said, this happens in every administration, but it just so happens that these LEED standards were adopted in 2010, 2 years after
Yes.
Obama was elected. So I think that this is what we're seeing here, and they forgot to look around.
Yeah.
And to ask a couple of questions. Well, the first question is, are there other standards? How can we do this? How can we make buildings energy efficient? Can we use green globes? That's an industry-based rating system that a lot of buildings are using because it's easy and it's on a 1,000-point scale. LEED is on a 100-point scale.
Yes.
Green globes is a 1,000-point scale, and it's competition. Now, if government folks want competition in wireless and other areas, why don't they want competition in building standards?
Yeah.
It would seem
That's right.
logical
That's right.
that they would want that same competition in building standards.
Well, right. And if some people think, oh, well, an industry standard green globes can't possibly be as tough as LEED, let's stack them up. Let's try it. Why doesn't somebody do a comparison? I think in the interest of transparency, we ought to do that. Weigh which ones have energy savings, which ones may not. Compare them to the costs. We may be very pleasantly surprised.
That's a great
here.
idea, Pete. You take buildings, you take a group of buildings, compare them to another group of buildings, and what the GSA should have done was made LEED a provisional standard,
Yes.
not the standard. Provisional, saying, okay, here's a standard. We know that let's just give it 5 years, 10 years, or whatever the amount of time
Sure.
is, and review it after that.
Yeah.
They seem very intransigent. This is what we're going with, and it really has been worked by NTU and all of us to bring more light to this, and they're slowly moving. The GSA is slowly moving,
Yes.
allowing green globes to get in there. So I think our work in the next couple of years is going to be important to show the comparison.
Yeah.
To say that green globe, hey, it may not work. I mean, there's indications that it does. I mean, there's a lot of, there's always been studies of these buildings. So, but you never know. It may not work. But give it a chance and see which standard is the best. And there has to be a separation, a breaking of this relationship between this nonprofit, the U.S. Green Building Council, and the GSA. Nonprofits should not be making money off of taxpayers. Nonprofits should not be getting rich off of taxpayers, and that there's something inherently wrong with that. Because whether you agree or disagree with the mission of the U.S. Green Building Council, as a taxpayer, you are a member of that organization.
Whether you like it or not.
You don't realize, but those dues are actually your taxes and your tax dollars going to the organizations, and that's why NTU and TPA, we don't take money from the government because some people disagree with us. I don't know who, but but some people disagree with us, and people shouldn't be forced to be part of an organization they don't agree with the mission.
Well, and there's also this other dimension to the LEED issue in GSA, and that GSA has had its share of scandals. Not just the sort of scandals we saw with some of its their top officials going to conferences and living it up, but really bad calls in terms of policy. There was this whole spate of lease arrangements that GSA was engaging in the late 90s and early 2000s, and the Government Accountability Office of Congress was warning that these may not be great deals down the line. GSA said, no, let us do it, and now we're starting to pay the price for that.
Well,
and you remember too this whole courthouse
I was just going to say that, Pete,
craze.
That's two of the first projects we worked on back in the 1990s. We've known each other for a very long time, and two of the first projects we worked on, the Boston Courthouse.
Yes,
that huge homage to wasteful spending, and also the Patent and Trademark Office.
Yes.
And so you're right. You go back 20 years, and GSA has, had a bad go at it. And we're
That's right.
and like you said, we're not just talking about Las Vegas vacations where some guy is sipping wine in a hot tub with his shirt off. I mean, that's the most visible. But it goes back, and we're talking about the Ronald Reagan building.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's these monuments to waste scattered across the country it was GSA's fault.
Yeah.
They had no oversight. I mean, they didn't do any oversight. And they didn't say, well, we're not going to put Italian marble in the Boston Courthouse, which there is.
Yeah.
And so they really laid the groundwork for the agency they are today.
Yeah. It's incredible how history so often repeats itself, and it's one reason why we're still on the job. I mean, folks, we don't necessarily want to do this the rest of our lives. I mean, there are other pursuits we could be engaged in. We love what we do, but it would be really nice to finally be able to say, this agency has learned its lessons. It's going to move forward on a managerially competent and fiscally responsible basis. Oh boy, haven't found one of those quite yet, but we keep searching.
We do, Pete. And people wonder why we're so obsessed with the bridge to nowhere and killing the bridge to nowhere, because it was a victory.
Yes.
we don't get many victories.
That's
and
right.
It was we were still living off of that. But let's look at getting back to LEED and the GSA.
Yes.
If by our actions we can bring more competition into this industry, into energy savings of federal buildings, of all buildings.
Yes.
But if we can get the taxpayer off the hook and we can bring more information to taxpayers and folks about what's happening, hopefully we can have energy efficient buildings. That's my goal.
Yes.
It would be awesome to have these federal buildings be energy efficient, but not at a cost to taxpayers. It just doesn't make sense that taxpayers are on the hook for energy efficient buildings.
Yeah. Let me second that, what David just said. This is not about exposing LEED or getting a bunch of managers within GSA. This is about the end result, which is a good deal for taxpayers through better buildings that are more energy efficient, that deliver savings over the long term. That's the end goal here.
Absolutely. And, hopefully if we ever get the FOIAs responded to, we can bring this to light and really just and move forward with this.
Absolutely. Well, keep us updated on your progress, David. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll have you back soon.
My pleasure.
It's time for the outrage of the week. In this week's outrage, the AP is reporting that 318,000 federal workers owe $3.3 billion in back taxes. Now, some of these I think that said are retirees, but
Yes.
that $3.3 billion is not a small amount of money. The next time somebody talks about hiking taxes, you might ask them to just get federal employees to pay their back taxes.
Yes, according to the Inspector General for Tax Administration at the U.S. Treasury, this has been a general problem now for a number of years. There's almost always been roughly 300,000 employees and retirees who owe some kind of obligation to the IRS, generally north of $3 billion. So it looks like the percentage amount is going to be pretty much consistent for previous years and years to come. That works out to 3.3% of all federal workers and retirees. And of course, the bragging point here is that this is way lower than what the IRS estimates to be the tax delinquency rate for the general population at 8.7%. But here's the rub. these folks ought to be very easy to track down within the federal government. They're either getting a paycheck or they are getting some kind of pension check. Almost all of them would be one or the other. They're easier to find than people in the general population, and they might actually tend to have a higher professional profile. So what I'd like to see is a comparison between organizations similar in composition to the federal government and the private sector, what the delinquency rate is there versus the federal government. I don't think you'd see quite as big a gap here. And it's the information gap more than anything else that makes this the outrage of the week. As we close out this edition of Speaking of Taxpayers, NTU remembers those who have fallen in service to their country this Memorial Day weekend, as well as their families. We hope you have a relaxing and reflective time in the days ahead.